Okay, so this is a bit of a weird one, but it's time sensitive, so I wanted to make sure that I actually did a video on it before this kind of got memory hold in the the archives of the internet. Over the last 2 weeks, two things have happened that I think really address the issue of the church's lack of a theology of the internet, a theology of tech, and really shows up. For those of you who might not have heard before, um, Pornhub has lost its Instagram account. Over the 10 years that it's had its Instagram account, Pornhub has accrued several content violations to the surprise of no one. And it has lost its Instagram account. It's been permanently banned, and that made news. Vice talked about it. The Babylon Bee made a thing about it. Because it was it's kind of funny that Instagram, a place where you have um, arguably softcore porn happening with a lot of the content creators that are on there, is banning simply just hardcore porn. Like it's an arbitrary line in the sand. There's sexual explicit things happening on Instagram all the time. Pornhub's just being honest about it. So that they banned him was not shocking, but why didn't it happen before? I mean, they should have been banned day one based on the terms of use and service, that they're a company that only exists for explicit content, and yet for some reason they were allowed to have a Instagram account at all. Shows that there's just double standards to every degree in this thing. But what I thought was interesting in the Vice article especially is Pornhub's response. Of course, this is and I want you to listen to this, and then we're going to change the like the descriptive words of what they're talking about and see if it sounds familiar before we go on to the next topic. So here's Pornhub's response to them losing their Instagram account. We, the undersigned, represent those in the adult industry that have for years been undermined by Instagram's opaque, discriminatory, and hypocritical enforcement of its own terms and policies. The letter states sex workers and performers have been unfairly targeted in the form of bans, shadow bans, suspensions, loss of live privileges, and content removal, despite taking extra care not to violate Instagram's community guidelines. Now, let's change some words. We, the undersigned, represent those at Grace Church that have for years been undermined by Instagram's opaque, discriminatory, and hypocritical enforcement of its own terms and policy. The letter states that pastors and Christians have been unfairly targeted in the form of bans, shadow bans, suspensions, loss of live privileges, and content removal, despite taking extra care not to violate Instagram's community guidelines. Does that sound familiar? Because we've heard this kind of stuff before. Christians have been kind of banging this drum, especially on the far right, that Christians are being targeted this way. And then all of a sudden, Pornhub gets targeted the same way, and you're like, oh, well, then this is, you'd think that this is equality, that this is, Instagram showing that they're equal across the board, and I'm not falling for it. I think that the reason why Pornhub got this ban is because they acted the same way that Christians act on this site, that they are acting in a religious capacity, that they are using the site like a church would use the site in the same vein because they have the same purposes. What they want to do is have an online version of what is an in-person experience, and that's what porn is. It is an online version of an in-person experience turned into content and marketed at scale, and the church tries to do a similar thing when it comes to online church. And that's why this happened. This didn't happen because they post inappropriate stuff. They're Pornhub. They were always posting inappropriate stuff. But when the app started, when Instagram started versus now, we've really developed into what these apps actually do as like pieces of technology, what they're trying to do. And Instagram's purpose is to market things. It's a brand building tool. Pornhub doesn't need that, but what it does need is followers. It needs people to consume their content. So it used Instagram in a predatory fashion. The same way that Christians can be using these platforms in order to get people to engage with their content. It's the same strategy. And that's something that we don't talk about, something that's like very very like layered in its approaches, like how we're supposed to approach these apps and these social media communities and stuff like that. We don't have a biblical basis. Like our faith and our theology don't deal with this kind of thing. It's you really do need kind of like a broad education on the matter to be able to figure out how to apply theological principles to these things, because they're so nuanced and technologically kind of distant from the text that we have. And so what we see here is that, Pornhub, a religion of, lust, essentially online, is getting treated exactly like churches do online sometimes. And that's for a reason, is because they have the same goals when it comes to online, and that having the same goals is something that Christians need to start talking about, and Christians need to like iron out. Because the last thing we want to do is have the same motivations for being online, just with different adjectives that, Pornhub does. Now, getting to the second bit of information that relates to this. It's a bit of a scatterbrain episode, I know. But the second bit is that inside 2 weeks of this announcement happening, what you had was Google Play removing Covenant Eyes and Accountable to You. Now, these two accountability softwares have been developed so that you can have them on your phone, have them on devices, so that you can you can have that layer of protection and accountability, for sites like Pornhub. And I think it is fascinating that Google, of all, companies, would ban these two things inside the same week that Instagram bans Pornhub, as if there's no communication between these, two platforms, these two organizations. There's a reason why Google banned these, and it's hard not to see it as an attack on the people who would use these. Like, these are two platforms that exist. These two apps are two things that exist for the sole purpose of making sure that people don't use a certain kind of content online. And inside the same week where a massive amount of people who could be exposed to Pornhub, on Instagram, the same, 2 week period that happened, you have this from Google, who, basically runs the internet when it comes to search terms. Now, they've made statements in the past saying that they're not going to show pornographic or explicitly adult-related search results unless the search terms are looking for that they've been able to work their algorithm in such a way that you can't search for something benign and end up with porn. But it's hard to take that in light with this, and with this removal of those two pieces of software from the App Store, in light of Pornhub's recent ban from Instagram. All these things are connected, and it takes a step back to be able to kind of see this stuff. But you can't get away from how we are religious in nature. You can't get away from the fact that we act in religious ways online. And when you take that step back and you start realizing that all these things are acting in religious ways, that these companies are making religious decisions, that these companies are making belief-based moves inside their space in order to garner following, in order to shun people who would be contradictory to their following, a lot of stuff starts to make sense. So when you hear this stuff, keep your eyes open, because this is the ever-changing landscape of online ministry, and it's a complicated and deep and messy pool, and it's one of the reasons why I think it should be talked about more. It just simply isn't. What we want is the quick fixes and the nice ways to basically just copy paste church onto online so that we can be there too. And it's not that simple. It's a very complicated, nuanced, deep, problematic space that is really not seeing Christians act like Christians in it. So I want to leave you with those thoughts. Kind of a weird little episode here, and let's rejoice that Pornhub's not on Instagram anymore, and let's mourn that Covenant Eyes and Accountable to You are no longer on the Google Play Store. Let's pray for everyone who needed those. Let's pray that Instagram heads more in this direction, that they keep this content off so people can't find it, and let's pray for each other. I hope you guys have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.